exhausted all of us. We've had 2 years of wave after wave of crisis. We've had COVID. Now we have the war in Ukraine, and this is disrupting our supply chains. And what it means is when we go to the supermarket, we're hit with sticker shock. The good news is that Mauritius has a good track record of emerging stronger from crisis. In fact, over the last 6 decades, Mauritius is in a small minority of countries that has been in the top 30 for most of the time. How come Mauritius did so well? Our success rests on 2 pillars. The first pillar is the international order which the US and its allies set up after the end of the Second World War, which we will call the Pax Americana. And the second pillar is that as a nation, we decided to enthusiastically participate in this global cooperative game. The Pax Americana rests on 2 pillars. The first pillar is guaranteeing freedom of the seas, backed by American power. And this is the first time in history that anyone could export from anywhere to anywhere without worrying about the shipment getting lost or attacked. You may remember from our own history that even in times of peace, the corsairs were attacking British shipping in the Indian Ocean. The second pillar is countries had to play a cooperative game. And a cooperative game requires everybody to respect the same rules. So multilateralism, the setting up of the United Nations, the World Bank, the World Trade Organization, the International Monetary Fund, were the foundations for common rules that would have to be adhered to by everyone. And what were these rules? The first rule is being very open, allowing newcomers to come in, being open to foreign direct investment, being open to letting labor come in when it's needed, being open to accepting ideas, and limiting corruption while building key institutions. What are the characteristics of the small minority like Mauritius that did well? The first thing is that most of them faced an existential crisis. In our case, at independence, we were worried whether we could meet the basic needs of our population: housing, food, education, health, pensions. For countries like Korea, Taiwan, Singapore, in addition, there were military threats that they had to face. The second characteristic is that all these countries limited rent seeking. At one point, Mauritius was the 33rd least corrupt country in the world. And finally, all these countries built the institutions required to play the Pax Americana well. Why is it that only a few countries succeeded? The reason is that elites in many countries decided it was better to keep the status quo because living off rents allowed them to travel when they want, have leisure when they want, not make much effort. But most important of all, when they retired, they are sure that their son would take over from them instead of in a more open system where the villager's daughter might be the one that takes over. But let's come back to getting out of the current crisis. The geopolitical situation is changing. The Pax Americana is on its way out. As we can see, American military presence overseas has been rapidly declining. And a new global order is emerging. Janet Yellen, the US Treasury Secretary, talks of nearshoring. Instead of the US guaranteeing security for everyone at no cost except to the US is focusing on protecting its allies and building new networks which are less global, centered on the Americas, and on key allies that decide to join the US supply chain. This means that Europe will have to build its own supply chains, and so will China. And in deciding where we position ourselves, China may not be such a good partner in the future. Due to the way they have handled COVID, growth is already declining in China, and on top of that, they face demographic pressures, and they've been the biggest beneficiary of the Pax Americana. As the Pax Americana recedes, the growth in China may suffer. What this means is that we need to think about how we do in the future. And here, unfortunately, we have challenges because this crisis is more complex than before, not only because the geopolitical situation is changing, but because we have changed. A worrying sign for us is that our exports peaked at $6 billion, but now are at $3 billion and have been falling. Moreover, we are doing worse in exports compared to our peers. Why did we change? At independence, we had a high sense of urgency, which we have lost because the country is now prosperous. We are pretty sure that we can meet the basic needs, and we don't see a sense of urgency that the previous generations had. We also, throughout most of our history, had competitive politics where not only we had a viable opposition, but which from time to time did take power. This put pressure on whichever party who happened to be in government to deliver results. Today, with a fragmented opposition, the sense of political pressure may be less than it was in the past. We also suffer from what has been called the Peter Principle. The Peter Principle states that any organization, unless you take explicit corrective action, will deteriorate over time, because from time to time, the wrong people get promoted, and when they, given human nature, they put less competent people under them, so over time the whole system degrades. Now, if on top of the natural deterioration, you also reward loyalty over competence in a system, that degradation gets worse, and after 40 years of the Peter Principle, today the civil service is not playing the role it used to play, where civil servants had a key role in formulating policies and giving advice to policymakers so that the best decisions could be made. We have also lost the force of consultation. This has been the great strength of Mauritius in most of our history. And in fact, if you look at the negotiation of the Sugar Protocol, which sustained us for many years, it was not only negotiated in close partnership with the private sector, but the representative of the Sugar Syndicate in London was actually given ambassadorial status by the government. How do we emerge from this crisis stronger than before, as we have from all previous crises we faced? We need to play the geopolitics right. We clearly want to join both the US and the European supply chains, and we want to also build regional supply chains. If merchandise trade is going to be more expensive and less secure than the past, we then want to focus more on services, particularly tourism. We want to look for niches where there's high value added. We want to diversify our tourism product, not only in terms of markets, but in terms of the offerings we have. How do we get there? Mauritius was blessed by many things which led to our success, but one of the key things has been proximate democracy, and this is where we can build social capital to find the way forward. A proximate democracy means not only we have elections which from time to time the opposition can win, but it means that elected representatives are very close to their people that they represent. Our politicians meet citizens in all sorts of events in daily life. They know what the population wants, and because it's a democracy, they tend to respond to what they hear people asking them. The problem is, over time, we have become much more concerned with asking politicians for personal favors or fixing specific problems we face instead of thinking about the needs of the country as a whole. Mauritians need to start believing that improving the country will bring them more benefits as individuals than asking for their personal issues of the day to be addressed. And because it's a proximate democracy, if a lot of citizens change what they tell politicians when they meet them, the politicians will respond. We can ride the waves of this crisis and emerge stronger if we take the future in our own hands. We need to unite around a clear, implementable, and realistic objective. In a country which depends on exports to pay for all the things we want to consume, it makes sense for us to fix an export target. We need to unite as a nation around the idea that we will double our exports from our peak of 6 billion to 12 billion by 2030. If we all collectively think how we can achieve this, and we press our politicians, whether from opposition or government, to actively work on achieving this role, we can unite, we can achieve this goal, we can export 12 billion by 2030. Thank you.